The minutes and access to the recording will be made available on our website, mopag.net. That's a new website we have, mopag.net. If you would like to join our organization or get on our mailing list, and we're not going to send you a lot of emails, please email us at mopagstl@gmail.com. That's mopagstl@gmail.com. Okay, I'm going to go directly to Marty Walsh for the treasurer report. Marty?
Okay, beginning April 1st, we had a balance of $742.07. Since then, we have received income from dues, $50, a library, and since we were not able to use the room, they automatically return money, and they've returned $20. And then disbursements, we've had to buy new checks, $35.14, and a PayPal reimbursing Steve is $49.90, which leaves us with a balance of $727.03.
Okay, thanks, Marty. Our first speaker, Jake Zimmerman, is one of 3 Democratic candidates for county executive. The other 2 are Sam Page, who spoke to our group in March, and Mark Manavani. Jake was a state rep in Jeff City for the 83rd House District and an assistant attorney general for the state of Missouri. He's currently the St. Louis County Assessor. After Jake speaks, we'll have a question and answer period. We have some questions for Jake that were submitted by our members. The surest way to get your questions answered today is to submit them in the chat box, and we'll try to get to all of them. If we have time, we'll also try and answer questions that you can raise by raising your hand, and you can raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand on the lower right-hand side of your screen.
Okay.
Down in the control area, if we have time.
Okay.
All right. With that, let's get to our first speaker, Jake Zimmerman.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear my audio?
I can hear you.
I see nodding heads. Great. I'm sorry to deprive you of the cute cat picture, because it's probably the best asset I have in these troubled times. But in lieu thereof, I will say thanks very much to Susan and Steve for your electronic hospitality here. And look, I'm looking at a screen full of people, many of whom I have known for years, and in a couple of cases, decades. And there's a lot of friends and a lot of people I see here who I know care about democratic politics and progressive politics for the right reason. But I am also keenly aware that this race is a horse of a different color, and that it is my job to earn support from every single one of you, and not to take anything for granted, particularly because after what St. Louis County has been through over the past few years, anything looks better. And I think we should just lead off this conversation by acknowledging, particularly in the middle of this terrible pandemic, any of the 3 human beings that Steve just named off for you that you get to choose from is guaranteed to be better than the criminal who was running our county government for the past several years, right? So the framework to keep in mind is that this is a good problem to have in a democracy. The question is not, who won't sell out the government to the highest bidder and who will show up for the meetings. I'm pretty confident that all 3 of us will do that, which means we get what a democratic choice should be, which is who can do the best job for the people of this community. And, if folks in St. Louis County didn't realize that was an important question a few months ago, I think everyone sure as heck understands that it is life and death right now. We are in the middle of a terrifying moment, and we are in the middle of a moment that reminds us why competent governance matters. If you look at the disaster that is our federal government right now, and for that matter, our state government in Jefferson City, you don't need to go any farther than that, than to understand that when you do this right, you get the opportunity to save lives. And when you do it wrong, there are real and long-lasting and potentially permanent consequences. So I want to be clear. Look, there are policy differences between me and my opponents that perhaps will matter to some of you. Those of you who have supported me in past races probably know that I am at least marginally the most progressive candidate in the race, that I have a somewhat different record on issues like LGBTQ equality, for example, and standing up to the gun lobby than some of my opponents do. But I want to suggest to you that my real calling card here, and the real reason that I would hope to earn your support, is because of what I have done for the past, going on a decade now, in St. Louis regional government, and that is fixing dysfunctional government. Recall that prior to 2011, St. Louis County didn't have an elected county assessor. Instead, what St. Louis County had was an office that was beset by scandal, drive-by assessments, stupid government tricks, a history of not being responsive and accountable to the taxpayers. And the people of this community voted overwhelmingly to make that office elected for the first time in 50 years. So when I ran to be county assessor, it was on a platform of fairness and accountability and independence and responsiveness. And frankly, after several years of Steve Stenger in power, those values almost sound quaint, right? But it is a reminder that there is a right way and a wrong way to do local politics. And the right way is to understand that the partisan political games, whatever gets played in Jeff City, whatever we see in Washington, D.C., government at this level is expected to just do the job. I'm looking at a room full of Democrats here, but there's not a Democratic or a Republican way to assess a house, and there's also not a Democratic or a Republican way to run accountable local government institutions. And so if I ask you to think about why you should want Jake Zimmerman in the top job at a moment like this when it matters so critically, I would ask you to think about when you've seen me on the front page of the paper, not for the political stuff that we all agree on, not for the times when I've been a progressive warrior, not for the times when I was a champion for our values. Instead, I would ask you to think about when you saw me in the front page of the paper because I was in an awkward fight with a bunch of very well-resourced and well-lawyered casinos who wanted to get a tax break, and had we let them get it, it would have meant laying off school teachers and firefighters. I invite you to think about the time when I had the guts to take on a fight with ritzy senior living centers that had plenty of political muscle to swing around, but were pretending to be charities when they really weren't. I would ask you to think about the time when I went after folks who were hiding their private airplanes because they thought they could get a sweet deal. And even though it ruffled some very prominent political feathers, I still took on the fight because it was the right thing to do. And I'd ask you to think about the last couple of years when I went to a series of town hall meetings in places like West County and South County and had the pleasure of getting yelled at by a whole lot of Tea Party flavored anti-tax activists because I believe that the right thing to do is to do my job and value people's property fairly. The only calling card I have in regional government is that I am not a politician to stick a finger into the wind and try and figure out what will look best at the press conference. I am someone who has devoted his career in public service to telling it like it is, to following the facts and following the law and trying to serve the people. I have some thoughts about what that kind of governance would look like in St. Louis County, because there's no question that this region has done a better job in this public health crisis than the borderline incompetence of our state government or the complete incompetence of our federal government. But it is also true that some big mistakes have been made and are continuing to be made, and I have deep concern about that. The federal government is sending $175 million in taxpayer resources to St. Louis County with the intent that it be used to help us recover from this pandemic, save lives, and protect people who have lost their livelihoods. The response of elected officials in St. Louis County, including, unfortunately, Democratic members of the county council, has been to treat that money as a slush fund. The response has been to give the appointed county executive unlimited authority to spend that money without a hint of real oversight. And what is worse, what the county executive then proceeded to do was to make a series of deals with all 7 of those county council members so that each politician could have a couple $1 million to hand out however they like and call it small business relief. That would be concerning enough under ordinary circumstances. I mean, we've seen this kind of patronage politics before. We saw it under Steve Stenger. We saw what happened when public funds were used as a kitty to suit each individual elected official's interests. But now, why did we get this money? We got this money to save lives. And you have but to look at the response of our regional government thus far to be concerned as to why this is not okay. It should not have come as a surprise to anyone that the impact of this public health crisis would not be felt equally throughout St. Louis County. Let's just call this what it is. I mean, I'm looking at a series of boxes on my computer screen, and I know where at least half of you live. And most of you live in the Central Corridor, as do I. And most of you probably know that the first testing sites that came online in this region and where the first opportunities to get access to needed healthcare came was in the part of town where we live. But that is not where the biggest impact of this virus has been felt. It is not where the highest death rate is. That is happening in less affluent communities, and in particular, it is happening north of the Del Mar Divide. And this should not have been a surprise. The county's health department's own numbers told us a year ago that on health metrics that matter, let's just take one, let's take infant mortality. A Black baby born north of Del Mar in St. Louis County is about twice as likely to die in childbirth as is a white baby born on the other side of that line. And that's before you even talk about other things like conditions for the mom and premature birth and preeclampsia and so forth. Health does not impact everyone equally, and when things go bad, it hits some parts of town worse than others. And it is inexcusable that the response of our public health community right here in St. Louis County was to spend too much time scrambling to make the press conference look good and not enough time getting the resources where they were needed most. And it is inexcusable that it is the Democrats on the St. Louis County Council who are now defending spending money in an unaccountable fashion while it is the Republicans of all people calling for transparency. That is not who we are. And again, be you Democrat or be you Republican, this is a room full of Democrats here. I am a Democrat and I am proud of it. But I also believe after what Steve Stenger did to this community, we owe it to the people here to make sure that we are doing public policy for the benefit of the people who need it most, not for the benefit of people on our particular political team, not for the benefit of who we think will help us win an election or anything else. To that end, I think it's high time that our local leadership stops being so timid about some of the politics of this stuff and does what we need to do to save lives. That also includes, for example, being much more aggressive about vote by mail and no excuse absentee balloting. The fact of the matter is that Missouri law says right now that a person who is homebound because of a health condition may vote absentee without excuse. Now look, I'm a Democrat and I'm a big believer in open access to the ballot. And if you look at my record in Jefferson City, you'll find that I was sponsoring legislation about vote by mail before it was cool. I bet there's a bunch of people here who agree with me that that would be a good thing for everyone. And you all know that Jay Ashcroft and his like disagree with me and disagree passionately. That's okay. Democrats and Republicans can disagree about the policy choice. What we shouldn't disagree about is that right now, it is time to stop waiting for Jay Ashcroft and Mike Parson. It is time to stop saying pretty please. And it is time to just send an absentee ballot application to every single voter in St. Louis County, which I believe the county election board has the authority to do right now. Rather than begging for permission from those in Jefferson City, rather than waiting on the uncertain outcome of litigation, which may or may not come to fruition, it's time to act. And I feel that way more broadly about all of this stuff. If we can take steps right now to save lives. That is what we need to do. Put the politics of it aside. I want your vote. I want to be your next county executive, but I'm a public servant first. You elected me to do a job right now, and I got to protect the 150 people who work for me. I have to make sure that we are not creating additional risk for the public, and I have to make sure that we are doing our part to save lives in this pandemic. Would that other elected officials in this town felt the same obligation to just get the job done rather than worry too much about who looks good in front of the camera. So with that said, look, I could jabber at you and give you the rest of my stump speech. And if you want to talk about everything else that is a challenge in county government, if you want to talk about what's wrong at the jail and what's wrong at the county animal shelter and so forth, I'll be more than happy to do it. But we all know what the overwhelming issue is here right now. And what I really want to do, I see there's a bunch of questions in the chat box already. I want to hear what you guys think. I want to respond to your concerns rather than just telling you what I think you might want to hear. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your time and your interest and for all that you do to support progressive politics throughout this region. And I'm excited to get to the questions. And Steve, Susan, do you guys tell me, do you want me to just sort of read off the chat box and go down here, or do you want to?
No, we'll take care of it, Jake.
Okay.
Thanks. Susan?
I think Susan is muted, Steve.
She might be muted. Yeah, I'm trying to bring her up now here. Sorry about that, folks. Go
Okay,
ahead, Susan.
thank you. I found, even though I'm co-host, I can't unmute myself. All right, we had asked our membership before the meeting to send us questions. So before we do the chat questions, I have a list of questions that were previously prepared. Aside from, the first one is, aside from navigating the pandemic, what 2 or 3 goals would be your top priorities if you became county exec?
Great question. It's rare that I get an opportunity to talk about anything other than the pandemic these days. But you know what I was talking about a couple of months ago was fixing the crisis of accountability in St. Louis County government. What Steve Stenger left behind was not just his own penny ante corruption and the stupid thuggish behavior. That's what got him sent to South Dakota. But what all of us are left with is we're left with a county government where leadership was hiding under the desk for 5 years. That is why you have this track record of prisoners dying at the county jail and then leadership lying to the public and claiming that they had access to healthcare when they didn't. That is not okay. How we treat the least among us tells us a lot about who we are. And, you know, I tend not to think that this stuff is the result of conscious malfeasance, although I was very concerned about reports of attempts by county leadership to cook the books and give favored contacts at the jail to the county executive's chief of staff's lobbying client. There's stuff like that that's concerning. But I think the bottom line is much more neglect and bad administration. And this is the thing that I specialize in, is getting into the weeds in government, finding the people who need to be empowered, finding the hardworking public servants who have just been waiting for someone to take the political thumb off the scales and let them do what needs to be done, and having the guts to admit when something is wrong. A great example of that is the county animal shelter. The animal shelter might not seem like the highest priority in a time like this, but you know what? It's unconscionable that pets that could be adopted instead get euthanized, and then the leadership lies about it to the public and tries to pretend that it didn't happen. But what's worse than that is what happened just within the past year, which is that when all this was called to light, the response of leadership, which by the way is the same as the current leadership of the county health department, was not to say, volunteers, thank you for bringing these problems to light, how do we fix it? Their response was to fire all the volunteers. Their response was to say, we don't like the uncomfortable truths you're raising. So all of you go home, and if you want, you can apply for your volunteer jobs. Talk to anyone who's volunteered at the county animal shelter trying to save the lives of dogs and cats, and they'll tell you how heartbroken they were by what happened there. I knew we needed to clean up that mess at the county health department long before we had any idea of how much more life and death the county health department's work would prove to be. And you see this throughout the county. You see this in some of the lack of trust and accountability at the police department. Recall the inability to tell the public where the Proposition P public safety funds went. Recall the putting a police officer on the stand and basically leaving him there to lie rather than admitting that the county had discriminated against a gay police officer, and then the county trying to argue in court with a straight face that discrimination was okay. Discrimination is not okay. And real accountable leadership means admitting when you've done wrong and trying to fix the problem rather than trying to shove it under the rug.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Okay, great, because I can't see anybody anymore. Something weird happened to my screen. All right, let me ask you the next question. As a result of the pandemic, St. Louis County may be hammered by reduced collection of sales and property taxes. Cities and counties facing fiscal stress need to plan to reduce costs and raise revenues. In what areas would you look to accomplish this?
So this is something I have intimate familiarity with because I became county assessor in 2011 at the tail end of the Great Recession. I saw what happened when property values plummeted, and I had leaders from school districts and fire departments begging me not to reduce assessments for fear of what it would do to their budgets and to their bottom lines. And I've also lived through good economic times and a great real estate market. And I've had people begging me not to raise assessments because they weren't sure what it would mean to the value of their home and to their property taxes. And this is one of those places where if we expect people in this community to have faith in their government, government's got to follow the law. You don't cook the books and you don't stick a thumb on the scales to try and get a result that you want. Government has to live within its means just like households do. And if the moment calls for tough choices, as I suspect this one will, then this is a time when we cannot afford to be wasting money on frivolity and political favors and all the other, handing out crony jobs and all the nonsense that we saw under Steve Stenger and unfortunately continue to see. And that takes me back to what I'm talking about in terms of federal money. If you look at the state of Missouri budget that the Republican legislature just approved, it largely relies on a wish and a prayer that money will come from Uncle Trump. Now, maybe money will come from Uncle Trump or maybe it won't, but we all know what will happen if it doesn't, which is that we're going to be trusting this governor without accountability to make very painful fund cut decisions, and that's very uncomfortable. In terms of St. Louis County, we do know that the money has come. We know that there's $175 million, but we also know that there are 80 plus municipalities within St. Louis County, many of whom have much deeper and more challenging public service needs than others. The needs in terms of saving lives in Wellston are different than the needs in terms of saving lives in Clayton. And if we think about the medium and the long-term implications of the pandemic, even after the day when we have better treatments and, please God, a vaccine, we will still be dealing with the knock-on economic consequences of this for years to come. And we all know what happens in bad economic times. We all know who loses their jobs first, and we all know who is subject to uncertainty first. To pick just one example, the courts have just started reopening in this past week. And what that means is that landlord-tenant lawsuits and eviction cases are going to start flowing through the system again. To me, county government has a responsibility to find people who are at risk of losing their homes, both because it's the moral thing to do at a time like this, and also because of the public health impact if people get thrown out of their homes. And I'd like to see us spending more of our resources on protecting people who are at risk of that tragedy, and less of our resources handing them out to county council people to give out as goodies.
Okay. Let me see. Third question. The East-West Gateway Council of Governments was formed in 1965 for cooperative problem solving among St. Louis City and nearby counties in Missouri and Illinois. Originally charged with coordinating transportation funding for the St. Louis region's projects, its mission has expanded to bring together governmental officials and private sector partners to develop regional plans for not only transportation, but also environmental quality, housing, emergency preparedness, and access to employment. Is the East-West Gateway Council something that St. Louis County gets value from? And if not, what needs to be done?
My general experience is that East-West Gateway has long been one of the voices of reason at the table in terms of regional governance, and we need more of that. This region, on our worst day, we squabble with one another, and we worry more about protecting our own fiefdoms, and we worry less about how we work together. You saw this in the very early days of the current county administration, when the county executive picked a silly fight with the mayor of St. Louis over who pays for 18 cops on the Metrolink, and a fight over who had the budget authority over it. My approach to public policy is a little bit closer to that regionalistic one, which is to say, I don't care who pays for the 18 cops. I don't care whose budget it comes out of. What I care about is that we have safe and accessible public transit. If you think about why the disaster that was the Better Together plan failed, the reason it failed was not just because they wanted to make Steve Stenger the king of everything, right? The reason that it failed was because of this sort of antiquated top-down astroturf notion of regionalism that says a bunch of privileged white Republican consultants are going to get together in a room and we're going to tell you what's good for you, and then we're going to shove it down your throats whether you like it or not. That's always the way this town has tried to do reform in the past. And what that does is, in addition to being undemocratic, and in addition to usually being deemed to fail, it sells short the work of the kind of people who are actually trying to build that grassroots consensus on the ground. And rather than tell people what is good for them, ask them what they need so that we find a way to work together on it. And then if you think about the, in particular, the early days of the regional response to COVID-19, where in my judgment, the mayor of St. Louis, Mayor Cruson, made some gutsy early choices, and you saw the county eventually and belatedly following her lead. I much prefer a world in which regional leaders all put their egos aside and figure out a way to work together and speak together.
Okay. Next question. What, if anything, can the county do to effectively address landlords who buy large apartment complexes with the intention of milking them for income and not maintaining them or providing even basic services such as heat, electricity, and garbage collection?
You know, the thing that really chaps my hide is that I also see those people on the back end, because those same slumlords, and let's call them what they are, they're slumlords, then have the audacity to turn around and show up in the St. Louis County property appeals process and try to argue that all those properties they own are overvalued because they're not in such great condition, and so they should have values lowered and thereby have their taxes reduced, right? It shouldn't surprise you, but it's precisely that kind of behavior where the people who have more resources try to find ways to game the system further. Fighting that nonsense has been an animating principle of mine for my entire time in public life here in St. Louis County. I think the question is specifically referring to TEH Realty, which was an unusually bad actor regionally, and it seems to me that there very well may have even been criminal conduct there, and I hope that Wesley Bell is investigating that. But there is a broader problem, and the broader problem is the conversion of owner-occupied real estate, particularly in near North St. Louis County, to rental real estate. And you saw this most urgently after the foreclosure crisis starting in about 2008. And I have seen it directly in the assessments. A foreclosure is a tragedy for the individual homeowner who lives in that house. But a few foreclosures in a block or a neighborhood becomes a broader tragedy for the entire community. because it depresses property values, because it tends to lead directly to less safe communities. It tends to lead directly to things like municipal ordinance violations because of poor maintenance of surrounding properties, which takes you directly to crime. It takes you directly to less stable neighborhoods and a whole bunch of things that we desperately want to prevent in this town. This is one of those places where I do think that county leadership needs to be more active. It's not okay to just wash your hands of it and say, this is a municipal problem or what have you. There's a big regional challenge here. Part of it really is a law enforcement challenge, and part of it is a resource challenge, and figuring out how we direct resources right now to keep people from being forced out of their homes during a public health emergency. I can't think of anything higher priority for regional government.
Okay. Next question. Does St. Louis County have a mechanism to take advantage of lessons learned and best practices of other counties in our nation that face similar challenges? If it does, what is it? And if not, what should be done?
I'd say not nearly enough. And this ties into the question that I see from Don Logue in the chat box. So maybe we can merge these together and sort of talk about them, because it's absolutely true that the county has an Office of Emergency Management, right? And the county has a planning department. The county has a bunch of public servants whose job was to be tasked with dealing with this kind of stuff. What I have seen too often in county government, particularly in the Stanger administration, but unfortunately continuing today, is a series of political decisions where leadership on the 9th floor of the building scrambles to get their story straight and marginalizes or diminishes the public servants who are actually tasked with doing the real work. And then those public servants go and release, as in the case of the Office of Emergency Management, a situation report, a detailed situation report. It goes out every day. I get it emailed to me. And it sometimes seems like they're just kind of shouting into the wind, because what I see from, for example, department directors and administrators within county government, that none of them has gotten much clear guidance from the county leadership as to what they are to do, both when the county was shutting down and sending people home, and now as the county is starting to bring people back. And so, you know, that's frustrating for me, just running an agency of county government and trying to make decisions that are in the best interests of my people and the people we serve without clear guidance from above. And yeah, it does leave you worrying what leadership is spending their time on, and if they don't have the time to do it, why they're not empowering those who should be doing it. When I am county executive, one of the hallmarks you will see in my leadership is a certain amount of humility. If the political leaders think they are the smartest people in the room and they poo-poo the, you know, the bureaucrats, the people who've been there a while, say, oh, all you are is a dirty bureaucrat. You know, what do you know? You know, listen to me and my communications people. Then what you do is you short sell decades worth of experience in whatever the critical public policy area is. The way you reform government, I say this from intimate personal experience, is you have to build some trust within the ranks. You have to show people that you have their backs, and you also have to show people that if they make a mistake, you'll have the guts to take ownership of the mistake, go in front of a camera and take your lumps so that the public servants can keep on doing the work they need to do. I would like to see a whole lot less finger pointing and, you know, shoving county employees under the bus and trying to figure out who to blame when mistakes are made. And I would like to see a lot more of the political leadership just take the accountability, take the lessons learned, and then move on and try to do better.
Okay, I've got one last question. Why did it take so long for the county to provide free Narcan to health centers to fight the opioid crisis?
I think it is of a piece with the county, and specifically the county health department's response to this pandemic, but also to the other things that the health department has been in charge of. And again, I come back to the animal shelter, which seems unimportant in the context of this broader thing, but it's such an interesting marker for what the leadership style has been there. And the leadership style there has been, when a problem is brought to your attention, you figure out how to make it not look so bad, rather than you figure out how to own it and deal with it. When you think about the opioid crisis in this region, and you think about the urgency of treating addiction not as a criminal justice issue first, but rather as a public health issue for which we have treatments that can save lives. Again, that's one of those things where it's policymakers' responsibility to do the right thing first and worry about the politics second.
Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you. Steve?
Okay, let's go to the chat questions. I think you answered the OEM question, the emergency preparedness question that Don Logue had. Ron Zager asks, what do we need to know about your two opponents?
And let's follow in with Sydney's comment afterwards that there is in fact a third opponent who I think is unknown to all of us, but has placed her name on the ballot and so should at least be taken seriously until proven otherwise. And I don't know much about her, so I can't speak much to her, but I think I can talk about the other two. You are blessed with a pretty interesting choice here, right? And you are blessed with a choice between people, all of whom I believe share a baseline commitment to run county government better than it was run in the past. Sam Page was a good city councilman. He was a good state legislator. While we've had modest differences of opinion over the years, you know, we're both more or less in similar political camps. It was a pleasure to serve with him in Jefferson City. I think what differentiates us is two things. One is that he has a certain amount of an instinct to play let's make a deal, which may serve well in a legislative compromise type environment, but may leave him more poorly suited to this moment that requires bold executive leadership. And number two, prior to being thrust into this appointed role, the biggest thing he'd ever run was a small anesthesiology practice. And I take nothing away from that. I don't know the first thing about being an anesthesiologist, and I bet it's a tough job. But I don't think he was terribly well prepared for the crisis in regional government. And I think that shows. As for Mark Mantovani, I also am inclined to believe that he's honest and that he would have done a better job in regional leadership than Steve Stenger had he beaten him when he ran against him 2 years ago. I certainly have disagreements with Mark. I don't understand why he thought it was a good idea to give $20,000 to Eric Greitens or to pal around with Rudy Giuliani. But I take him at his word that he's not a Republican anymore and that he's changed his ways. To me, the bigger concern with Mark is that what he is a very successful businessman who I'm sure made a lot of money in the private sector and whose attitude seems to be that I was successful in business and I have no government experience, but I alone can fix this. And you'll forgive me as a Democrat in 2020 America if I have a certain amount of skepticism about that sort of message. But I want to be clear with you that I think that both of them are honorable people, and I think both of them in their way are trying to do the right thing. And that's sort of what I come back to. The reason I want to earn your support, and I say this advisedly because I'm speaking to a group of pretty progressive people, right? I don't want to earn your support because because I'm a little bit more progressive on fill in the blank hot button issue, because Dr. Page voted against marriage equality a decade ago and I didn't, right? That stuff differentiates us, but it's not the reason you should care. The reason you should care is that I have run and turned around and made better a dysfunctional branch of county government, and I've had the guts to take my lumps in the accountability on the days when we didn't do so good. And I don't think that either of the two of them can say that.
Ron Zager asks, Lisa Clancy's brother works for Sam Page campaign. Is that a problem?
The problem is not who has hired whom, although I do see a certain trend of handing out jobs for reasons that look more like political favors and less like hiring the best person for the job in county government. The bigger concern is why the county council, which when Steve Stenger was in charge, was so keen correctly on fighting for transparency and accountability, has now seemingly abandoned that push. So I don't want to take shots at Lisa or John or anybody else here. My question for Lisa is the same as my question for the other members of the county council, which is, why do they think it's okay to hand out millions of dollars in federal funds, not to where public health experts say they're needed the most, but rather as slush funds for politicians to distribute? And why do they think it's okay to give the county executive a blank check to spend money however he sees fit with no real accountability?
Okay, I think that was the chat question. Cindy Jackson did mention Jamie Tolliver is a fourth candidate, another candidate for county exec. Do you have any comment about that? I really don't know much about that.
I've not had the pleasure of meeting Ms. Tolliver. I can tell you that she filed at the the last minute in the final hours before filing closed, and I'm not aware of any meaningful campaign infrastructure from her. But perhaps some of you on this meeting will have the opportunity to hear from her at some point, and maybe you can reach your own conclusions.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions? We don't have as large a group as I thought we might, so I could unmute you all if you want to raise your hand and have any additional questions for Jake.
That would be a good thing to do at this time.
This is Trish Gunby. I'm on the phone. I'm a state rep in the 99th. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Trish.
Hi. I just have a quick question. I'd be interested in your thoughts. We voted this past week on whether or not county assessors should be elected or not because of problems coming out of Jackson County over in Kansas City. And there was a lot of discussion about should the state legislature be deciding what counties should be doing, kind of similar to Better Together. And it passed along party lines, but I'd be interested in knowing your take on that.
My take on it is the same as was my take when this happened to St. Louis County a decade ago. And to be clear, this was before I had any inkling that I might one day run for county assessor. I think elected assessors are great. I think that accountability to the public, particularly when it comes to taking money out of your pocketbook, is great. And I think that more democracy is better than less democracy. I also believe very strongly in local control of government institutions. So while I personally thought it was a great idea for the county to elect its assessor, and 70+% of people in St. Louis County voted the same way, I thought it was a terrible idea for Jefferson City to shove it down St. Louis County's throat. And I think that consistency demands that I give you the answer you now expect out of me, right? Which is that if Jackson County voters decide in their wisdom to start electing their assessor, more power to them. My guess is they'll get a more accountable assessor's office than what they've had in the past. But if a bunch of Republicans from Marshfield, Missouri decide that it's a good idea to tell the voters of Jackson County what they need to do in their local politics, that ought to concern you greatly, and it ought to concern all of us in a populated area about what the next thing is that the legislature will shove down our throats, because it's a pretty easy through line to stuff like gun violence, where we know that there are elected officials from other parts of the state whose values on that subject are different than the values of folks in this community. And so I don't want the legislature telling us that we have to allow guns in our schools or in our places of worship. And if I don't want that, then I'd better be consistent, and I'd better say that I also don't want the legislature telling the city of St. Louis whether to elect their assessor, regardless of whether I think elected assessors are great or not.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, do we know why Sam Page didn't prioritize COVID-19 testing in North County?
You'd have to ask that question of him.
Okay.
All I can tell you is that the county health department knew for a while. He himself has said that as early as March, they knew that that this epidemic would hit differently and harder in North County than elsewhere. And never attribute to conspiracy what can adequately be explained by a lack of competence or capability. So I'm not gonna point any fingers at intent within county government, but the proof is in the pudding, and the simple fact is that the county didn't respond quickly enough and in the right way.
So I put this in chat, but one of the problems we've had, I think community-wide, is getting straight answers as to the county, and for that matter, the state's ability to acquire test kits, testing supplies, and so that we can have effective contact tracing efforts. And, you know, I think part of the problem is they're afraid to deliver bad news, that they have not been successful. So, you know, transparency, I think, is an issue there, and I think obviously this is something that you're very sensitive to. So, but if you want to speak to
bad news is best delivered sooner than good news, and it is best delivered without trying to point any fingers. You know, it's better for political leadership to just take accountability for it and move on. I think about my days in the legislature when I took a very unpopular position among my colleagues at the time, which was to legislate very clearly that the Missouri Sunshine Law applied to members of the General Assembly, and that the then Republican leadership sort of couldn't get away with this nonsense of claiming that records of individual House members weren't really records of the House. And I introduced that legislation as an amendment to a Republican bill about the Sunshine Law. And nobody had the guts at first to vote against it, right? Because everybody wants to be in favor of sunshine. And then I saw something interesting, which was that they didn't close the vote. Instead, Tim Jones, then the Speaker of the House, you'll recall him as a staunch social conservative and a big ally of some of the more noxious forces in local leadership. Tim Jones walked down off the dais and started personally walking over and whispering in the ears of Republican legislators one at a time until just enough of them had changed their votes that the noes outnumbered the yeses by one, and only then did he run back up to the dais and close the board. I've never forgotten that moment. There is a strain in elected leadership that thinks that they'll be better off if they govern in the dark. And it's never the right instinct, and it never works out well. It's always better to own up to what went wrong, to release the documents promptly, to respond to the sunshine request, to give the newspaper what they want, and then to talk to the public about where you go from here.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yes, I would like to ask, and then a follow-up. The question I want to ask is, should any county employee, under any circumstances, be required to live in the county, as some city police are?
So, well, you know, I'm a county employee and I'm required to live in the county, and I would lose my job if I moved out, and I'm perfectly okay with that level of political accountability. My experience is that residency requirements for...
Jake, excuse me, you're an elected official.
Of course.
I'm talking about employees as opposed to elected officials.
I apologize if I was a little bit flipped there. The serious question, of course, is public servants who are employed by the people of the community. And my experience is that topic is particularly controversial when it comes to first responders, when it comes to cops and firefighters. There's been bitter disagreement in the city of St. Louis on that subject, a disagreement that spilled over into the legislature. And I think one of the things you've seen Mayor Cruson come to the conclusion is that even if she may personally have favored keeping those requirements, she ultimately concluded that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze in terms of fighting with folks in the legislature and fighting with the representatives of the police and the fire department in the city. So while telling you that personally I can see the arguments on both sides of that one, if I think about the urgent needs, for example, in the St. Louis County Police Department, the most urgent need is not determining which side of a municipal line a given cop lives on, right? The most urgent need is making sure that the cops who wear the brown shirts can trust the leadership in the white shirts, which hasn't always been the case these past few years, and making sure that we say with clear voice that discrimination in the police department or any place else is never okay. And personally, I think I'd worry more about fixing those issues before I worried about introducing new requirements that might prove highly controversial and that might divide people of good heart within this community.
Thank you. My follow-up question is, when you leave us today, could you put your cat back on, please?
I know where I rank, Ron.
Are there any additional questions for Jake? Okay, thank you very much, Jake, for coming to our Zoom meeting today.
I really appreciate not just the welcome, but also the extremely thoughtful questions. I wish I got questions of this level of thoughtfulness every time I spoke in the community. And, you know, look, like I said at the beginning, this is a group of sophisticated people and a group of people who cares a lot about progressive politics. But this is a time to set aside whatever our many points of agreement are about what needs to be done better in Jeff City and what's wrong with Washington, D.C. This is a time for us to work together to try and do what's right for the people in this community and to save lives. And I know that everyone on this call is doing their part. And for that, I say thank you. In addition, of course, to the part where I hope to say thank you for earning your support in the Democratic primary in August.
All right, thank you again, Jake.
Here comes the cat.
Thank you.
Hey. She's a beauty.
Do we have Will Kruger as our next speaker? I don't know if he's come yet.
I don't see him on the list.
Okay.
He said in an email that he was going to show up at 2:35, which is in about 4 minutes.
Okay.
So, maybe we can deal with some of the other business.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do some announcements. MOPAG is scheduled to have Nicole Galloway as our speaker in June 13th. So again, if you're not on our mailing list but would like to be, please send an email to mopagstl@gmail.com. If people have an announcement that you would like to make, either raise your hand or just speak, and go ahead and do it. Anyone?
I'll make an announcement. This is Trish Gunby, State Rep in the 99th, and I have 1 week left in session, and I'm back at it again, running to retain my seat, and I'm excited to do that. It's been an interesting session, and I would imagine next week we'll deliver the same. So stay tuned, but would love everybody's help as we go forward. Campaigning and things like that obviously are at a standstill. So anybody who's willing to help phone bank, and there's some other creative ways that we're going to engage folks in the district. I'll be sharing that information, but follow along, and would appreciate folks' efforts as we gradually kind of reopen things. I know all of us will be vying for volunteers, so anybody who can help me would be appreciated.
Is that at your website? Is that where people would go?
Yes, you can go, and there's a volunteer sign up, or you can always email us at votefortrish@gmail.com. And that's for spelled out, FOR. But I have folks phone banking now, basically just checking in with constituents. I've been doing that for a few weeks. So really not in campaign mode, but more, how are folks doing?
This is kind of.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Jackson. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. I know a couple people were talking about my comment that I put in the chat. I just put that in there just because I wanted everyone to be aware of all of our candidates that we have, especially the only minority that we have running for that position. So I just wanted people to be aware. It was in no way any kind of endorsement or anything like that. I honestly don't know much about Jamie myself either. Just wanted to kind of, I guess, throw her name out there just so that people know. I also wanted to let you all know that I am a candidate for Creveport Township Committee Woman. I'm super excited to try to get the township a little bit more revitalized, energized, so that we can get behind some of our candidates like Trish and as well as Jill Shoup, Ginka, Nicole, just so that we can have some more volunteers from them and have an easier way for people to get connected through their townships. So that's really what I'm looking forward to. If you have any questions, want to reach out to me, you can reach me by email at electsydney, SYDNI, Jackson@gmail.com, or you can find my Facebook page, which is Sydney Jackson for Missouri, or if you just type in the search bar at Sydney for Mo, you can find me there as well.
Well, thank you for coming to this MOPAG meeting, and we hope to see you again and hear about your successful election in August.
Can I say something real quick before Will starts?
Go ahead, but Will has to leave around 3 or earlier, so.
Okay, I'll do it after. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, MOPAG has joined with other organizations in endorsing opposition to SJR 38. Our next speaker, Will Kruger, is with us today to bring us up to date on Clean Missouri and what's going down with that. So go ahead, Will.
Right on. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Right on, perfect. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your support of Clean Missouri and opposition to SJR 38. As you know, Clean Missouri was passed in 2018 with 62% of the vote, 1.4 million votes, to reform primarily the way that state legislative districts are drawn. So we had a problem in Missouri for decades of partisan gerrymandering, where state political leaders in Jefferson City would draw legislative districts for state house and state senate that were mathematically designed to be a lock for one party or the other. What that does is it makes our politics more extreme. It motivates partisans, and it encourages candidates to run to the far left or the far right. And that means that our democracy doesn't actually represent the people. So Clean Missouri fixed that problem with a nonpartisan, clear, transparent, and fair system. And now the legislators in Jefferson City are trying to overturn it. So that brings us to today. As I'm sure you know, they have 6 days left in the session. It ends on May 15th. They may come back for a special session, but effectively they have 6 days left to try to overturn the will of the people and distort our democracy. And they're trying real hard. They have a bill called SJR 38. It's been passed out of committee in the House and passed by the Senate, which means that the last hurdle is a full vote from the House. That could come up anytime in the next 5 days, in the next 6 days, pardon me. So we're trying to really motivate people to call their representatives and tell their representatives to vote no on SJR 38. SJR 38 is not just a repeal of Clean Missouri, though it certainly does that. It is much, much worse. It is truly an extreme gerrymandering bill that would make Missouri potentially the most gerrymandered state in the nation. So let me give you some specifics about that. First, it would repeal Clean Missouri. It would bring us back to our old gerrymandering system where partisan interests and the party leaders of both parties appoint lackeys and lobbyists and other people who owe them favors to draw districts. So that would be the beginning. It would increase the power of that panel, and it would institute a definition of gerrymandering that is so broad that it would allow a map that is the most gerrymandered of any state in the country to be allowed. So that's not any definition at all, right? A law that says everything goes is truly not a law at all. Additionally, it would keep a lot of the data that the maps are based on secret. It would be, nobody would be able to recover it. It would take away many people's constitutional rights to sue to repair the maps, and it would hand tie judges so that they couldn't fix the entire maps. Under the current structure, under the clean structure, if there's a problem with a district and a judge finds that the entire map, the entire state map is corrupted because of any number of districts, he can tell, he can say the process has to start over and they have to come up with completely new maps. Under this new SJR 38, judges would not have that power. So basically, they're taking away our constitutional right as people to oversee the maps. They're keeping the data secret, and then they're saying that judges can't be a check and balance on the system. It really concentrates power in the hands of the leaders of the two parties in Jefferson City who have an obvious incentive to gerrymander our state. And like I said, their definition of gerrymandering is so broad as to be no definition at all. So it's a really terribly, truly extreme bill. We have national partners like the Brennan Center for Justice and former Attorney General Eric Holder who support Clean Missouri and oppose SJR 38. Former Senator Jack Danforth just wrote an op-ed discussing why he thinks Clean Missouri should continue to be the law of the land. So that brings us to what we can do to make that a reality. We have 6 days to pressure our representatives to do their job and represent us. And we're going to take care of that by calling and phone banking every day until they vote. So I actually have a phone bank training at 3 o'clock that I would invite anyone to attend. It's really, really simple. All you need to do is go to cleanmissouri.org/meetup in 20 minutes. That will take you to a different webinar where I'll show you how to use our virtual software. And then once you've been trained on the software, you can phone bank anytime at your own convenience. Though we'll also be making calls at regularly scheduled times. We're calling voters in strategically chosen districts, asking those voters to call their representatives and tell them to vote no on SJR 38. These are representatives who were elected with less of the vote than Clean Missouri received in their district. And Ellen asked a great question. I should explain that if SJR 38 passes, it will go to the vote of the people because it's a constitutional amendment to overturn the constitutional amendment that we passed in 2018. In Missouri, constitutional amendments also need a simple majority to become law. So the big point I want you guys to all take away from this is SJR 38 is not just a repeal of Clean Missouri. It is a truly extreme gerrymandering bill. And the representatives may vote on it in the next 6 days, which could send it to the vote of the people. But we definitely can stop them by uniting the movement of 1.4 million Missourians who want a fair democracy and calling our representatives. And to call your representative, I would like to teach you how to do that on a simple software. And all you need to do is go to cleanmissouri.org/meetup at 3 o'clock today or at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. And then let me give you my contact info in the chat here so that you can contact me at any time. This is my cell phone number and I will pick it up unless I am sleeping and answer any questions. I love talking about this stuff. So I understand. Oh wait, and let me put in here when the trainings are. Wednesdays at 3, Saturdays today at 3. So anyway, I know that I said a lot of stuff really quick there. So I'm really happy for questions. You can type them in the chat. You can ask them however you would like. And thank you.
I have a question. This is Al Gerber. It's been great to have Jack Danforth speaking up because then it makes it bipartisan. Are there any other Republicans that we can mention along with Jack?
Yeah, there are tons of Republicans who support us. So I would first say that about 300,000 people, Missourians, voted for Josh Hawley and voted for Clean Missouri. So that shows that it's a really bipartisan coalition behind Clean Missouri. Former Senator Rob Schaaf, who was a really vocal supporter of Clean Missouri in 2018. He's no longer in the Senate, but he's still a vocal supporter. And then this isn't strictly Republican, but a number of small town, generally very conservative newspaper editorial boards from far afield as Bolivar and Joplin have endorsed us in their editorial pages this week and urged legislators not to move on SJR 38. Thanks, Al.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is it mostly the representatives in the rural counties that's, voting, against the Clean Missouri? Because I get an impression most of my representatives are for Clean Missouri.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Christina. I would say generally most of the representatives in the St. Louis area are supportive of Clean Missouri and oppose SJR 38. The big exception is Dean Plotcher in District 89. He's really, really pro SJR 38. But to your broader point, yes, I think that rural representatives are generally more supportive of SJR 38 and more opposed to Clean Missouri. I'll tell you that the representatives or the districts that we're calling today, 5 of those 6 are very, very rural areas. So that's a good insight.
Are you encouraging people to call these even though they're not my representative?
Yeah, so we're asking volunteers to call voters in these 6 districts and then ask the voters to call their representative. We're basically because we're fighting an information game here, right? Like so many people are glued to their TVs learning about COVID. I am too. My family is talking about COVID every day, but we can't let the threat to our democracy sneak under the COVID concern. And so when we talk to voters, most of them are only vaguely aware of what's happening in Jefferson City around redistricting. So we try to explain it quickly and then ask them to take a stand for democracy. And we're calling people who we think are likely supporters already. So they're generally really effective, really positive, really effective phone calls that we have.
Will, this is Steve Reed. On the chat session,
yeah,
you mentioned the phone bank trainings and people to contact you, but didn't you give another place that people could go?
Yeah, absolutely. So those phone bank trainings are Wednesday at 3 and Saturday at 3. And to access the webinar that I'll be doing, all you need to go to cleanmissouri.org/meetup at those 2 times. That link takes you straight to the webinar, which will be starting in 14 minutes. And I'll teach you how to use the software. The training takes 15 minutes at most. And we also talk about the bill a little bit. So if you come today, you'll already be ahead of the curve.
So this is calling voters direct, right? In some of the problematic areas.
Exactly. I like that word.
I think that's great. I really like that reach out.
Yeah, it's also I actually see a lot of familiar faces because I've been on ballot campaigns and statewide initiatives for 5 years now in St. Louis. I've never had a more receptive phone bank audience than this. People who know what's happening in Jeff City are really upset and are really happy to get an outlet. Someone calling them and saying, this is outrageous. Here's how you can help. And people who don't know are really receptive because Jefferson City representatives have frankly lost all credibility in most of the state. And if a stranger calls them and says, hey, did you know that your representative is doing this? It sounds very reasonable. It sounds like something representatives would do to most people.
Okay, any other questions for Will? I don't think Will had a beard the last time I saw him.
No, it's I also haven't gotten a haircut or a beard trim in what is it? It's a million days now, it feels like. So
I did not recognize you.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate the invitation. I hope to see a couple of you in 12 minutes. And if not, Wednesday at 3, cleanmissouri.org/meetup.
Okay, we'll help to get the word out on that.
Thanks, Will.
Spread that far and wide. Really appreciate y'all and stay safe. Thanks, Ellen.
Steve,
Yes.
Elena Webb had said something. She wanted to
Right.
make
Right. Helena, are you there?
Yeah, hey, I'm here. I just wanted to also remind everybody, you probably know, but you may not. I'm Helena Webb. I'm running for state representative in District 100. And I just wanted to say about that one of those last questions about what Republicans are against clean. My opponent, Derek Grier, was definitely against Clean Missouri during the last election and the ballot initiative, and I am expecting him to vote for this for SJR 38. I do believe that Shamed Dogan also is against Clean Missouri. He spoke about it with me offline at a forum about guns, about the Second Amendment, and he was basically saying that any Republican that believes in Clean Missouri just wants to destroy the party. So I don't think that we should take for granted any Republican politician at this point. Maybe some Republicans in the community, but please do not think these people are not dangerous. My opponent is very dangerous when it comes to these things, and we need all the support we can get. We're also doing phone banking. We're asking people, it's a very easy ask, 5 calls a week for my campaign. And we will be discussing as soon as my opponent makes that vote for SJR 38. We'll be making calls, and our script will be about his vote for Clean Missouri. And so if you're interested in any of that, or you want to see me interviewing Don Logue at my website, his video will be up on Monday. But I've been doing a series of videos where I interview people about different causes. So please check me out. It's my website this time is Helena Webb with 2 B's for mo.com. And you can see Don there. And if you want to volunteer to make 5 calls a week for us, we'd really appreciate it. We're building this very small, this army is building up, and it's an easy ask. We don't want to burn people out. But we're calling Democrats and unknowns. So there's people we need to flip. Yes, Don?
Yeah, and just the session we recorded yesterday, it was on my experience in helping set up a testing center in North County, which was, one of the first, if not the first, that came out of the hospital walls and the clinic walls to begin, helping us understand where this disease is spreading, and also to provide that important service on a more accessible basis. So.
Yeah, it was a good, and you'll notice from my interviews, just so everybody knows, I run in a very Republican area. I am making sure that I can connect with Republicans and independents and Democrats. It's so important for us to move the needle because so many of the Republicans in my district are moderate and they don't really agree with what's going on. They just need somebody to vote for that they feel understands them as well. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I hope that you'll all go to my website, helenawebformo.com. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Helena.
Sure.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, go ahead.
If I can take a quick moment, because if we're doing announcements, my name is Jessica Labazada. I am running for the committee woman position in Queenie Township. One of the unusual ones is that it is contested. So there are 2 of us running. And so many of you guys know me from helping Mike run for the 99th ahead of when Trish actually won it in the special. So I just wanted to remind people that committee woman in August in the 99th, there's going to be 2 choices, or I'm sorry, in Queenie, there's going to be 2 choices. So just putting my name out there.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Well, we've covered most of the ground that we had had on the agenda. We have additional time for discussion if there are any topics that people want to bring up. Be as freewheeling as you like.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, I can hear you.
There's still some people who are muted, so
Oh.
you may need to unmute everybody.
Well, I wasn't sure if they were muting themselves. Some of those people, I think, went and muted themselves.
Oh, I see.
I was muting myself because there's a phone conversation in the background. But I would like to vote that we approve the treasurer's report.
Okay. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the treasurer's report is approved. Well, I know there's been a lot going on at county level, state level, national level. And speaking personally, it can get a little bit overwhelming at times. A little bit more in the county. And save ourselves at the county level, where we can have perhaps more of an impact. Well, if there's no further discussion or topics that anyone wants to bring up, I think our board will need to meet shortly. Maybe we can meet tomorrow on Zoom, tomorrow or Monday, and take a look at our future meeting agendas. We need to do that. I think we need to decide whether or not we're going to invite Mark Monavani, and when we would do that, if we do that.
And Jamie Tolliver.
Yes, right. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
Second? May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I'm really glad that we saw Jake today and heard him speak. I think it's very important that we get some time with all the candidates. And it's unfortunate that we didn't get a longer period of time with Sam Page. And that's a discussion we can have as well as to whether or not we invite him back. So, all right, well, thank you very much, everyone. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Okay.
Susan, you want to stay on a moment?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Al's still on too.